Live from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez. America's favorite late night talk program featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S, at Rich Valdez on all of the social media, your liberty-loving Latino amigo, and happy to be here with you. Give us a call, join the national conversation. 8334-VALDEZ is the phone number, 8334-VALDEZ. And what's the latest scheme to smuggle humans into the United States at the border? All right? You give up? I'll tell you. Imitation FedEx vans. That's right. Smugglers used cloned FedEx vehicles in an attempt to bring 26 illegal immigrants into El Paso. U.S. Customs and Border officials reported that the Santa Teresa Station anti-smuggling unit received a tip about the plan. Agents and state troopers stopping vehicles, two of which were outfitted to look exactly like white FedEx vans. The officials arrested 4 smugglers involved with the scheme, as well as apprehending 26 migrants who were from Mexico and Guatemala. Now, Border Patrol sources told the New York Post that there is a FedEx facility very close to the border in Santa Teresa, in New Mexico, which is part of the El Paso sector. Excuse me, I can't speak today. And a known pickup area for smugglers and migrants alike. They joked that the smugglers were either going to pay a FedEx driver to smuggle migrants or that they were going to clone a truck. Little do they know that their joking would actually come to pass. And there's a photo of the FedEx truck. It's one of those box vans that looks kind of like a Sprinter, and even has that little fold-away diamond in the back where you could put hazardous material or not hazardous material. Looked pretty legit to me. It would have fooled me. It says FedEx Express. Wow. Anyway, Border Patrol agent Sean Coffey said the tactic isn't new, but hasn't been used in recent years. We've seen FedEx vehicles in the past, but haven't seen them in a while. We do see other types of vehicles used, like construction vehicles that they put a sticker on so it looks like a company vehicle. Kofi condemned the smuggling scheme as a great danger to the lives of migrants following the recent tragedies where dozens of people died in the back of poorly ventilated trucks trying to sneak past the border. I remember that last year. They had, something like 93 people back there? Absolute insanity. But yeah, here it is. They had the truck. It was completely empty. And they tried to pull it off like they were legit FedEx people. And it just, for me, I just think, man, this is a bad look. You know, I mean, great that they caught him, but imagine how many they don't catch, and imagine how many are getting stuck, right? Like they said before, like the ones that are getting stuck and actually dying in the back there. I think that's the part that is very lamentable here. Anyway, in other news, we shall move on. Trump is still the big story of the day all over the place. Wherever you go, somebody's saying something about him. And if they're not saying something about Trump, well, of course, they're talking about Biden and his railroad that apparently is going to go across the Indian Ocean. Yep. In Joe Biden's world, railroads go right across the ocean. And I mean, I guess he's planning on building a bridge because otherwise it's going to be pretty tough. But that's Joel Baboso Biden, also known as the big guy. And, it's unfortunate that this is where we are with the big guy, but it is where we are. Now, Biden is going to be ending DNA testing at the southern border. Now, this is the testing that you would typically do when somebody comes in claiming to be a family seeking asylum. But we've learned in recent years that these are not families, right? These are a male smuggler, a female smuggler, and children that are being smuggled into the country, sometimes trafficked into the country against their will. So Biden will, in effect, be boosting child trafficking by ending DNA testing at the southern border. And Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security, are expected to surely boost child trafficking with their decision to stop DNA testing at border facilities when they say families approach. This is a bad idea, it seems. Laura Rees, who's been a guest on this program from Heritage Foundation, she told the Senate Judiciary Committee on Wednesday that the plan will ultimately lead to more smuggling and trafficking of migrant children at the border, saying, quote, "The Biden administration has also recently made the nonsensical decision to stop using DNA testing of suspected fake families at the border. The results are very predictable: a return to more child smuggling, child recycling, and child trafficking. Saying you're a family, and we'll just take your word for it." Absolutely horrible. Now, this DNA deployment is a rapid DNA test that was deployed by then President Trump back in 2019. And this is what they're trying to undo, like they typically do, right? They typically. I'm going to take a big, huge coffee break during the commercial. This is what they typically do. Anyway, now I want to get into something before we take the pause, because again, this is, I think, a big story from yesterday that I wanted to follow up on. And it's Senator Ted Cruz had grilled one of the FBI officials over these recordings that we keep hearing about. Now, I talked about them last night briefly. I talked about them on my podcast, This is America with Rich Valdez. You'll hear that tomorrow. But I'll repeat it. If these Biden recordings exist, why haven't we heard them? If you're going to blackmail somebody and say, look, I got recordings of you, and if you don't come clean to give me what I want from you, then you've got to give me, I'm going to show them to the authorities. Well, if you're going to blackmail somebody and say you've got these tapes, at this point, what leverage do you have? That they're in the media? I mean, clearly, I don't think Biden's backpedaling going, oh, they're fake, they're phony, they're fraud, anything. It's a deep fake. He hasn't said a word. Why? He doesn't care. He doesn't care what these tapes. I don't think they have these tapes. Again, the last time we heard about tapes, did they have those? No. They didn't, right? It was the Trump tape. Now, again, this is a tape against Biden, not a tape against Trump. But either way, to me, it sounds like a phony tape. It sounds like the Burisma people are trying to overplay their hand because they had a deal with Biden. Maybe he reneged on the deal or whatever it was, and now they're trying to scare him. I don't think it's going to work, because I don't think Joe Biden's a guy that gets scared, personally. I think he doesn't believe anything can happen to him. And listen, if I were president of the United States, I'd probably feel that way too. Especially if I was a 47 or 50-year-old crook, right? Now, I'm not saying he's 47 years old, but he's been a crook in Washington for at least that long. So I think when you have that level of experience doing this type of thing, it just becomes muscle memory, more corruption, just like we've seen time and again from Biden. And I just don't think this tape exists. But we'll talk about that towards the end of this hour, as well as at the top of hour number 3 when we get into Open Phone America. But straight ahead, I want to discuss Trump derangement syndrome and how it continues to just affect so many people, melting down over the indictment, melting down over the fact that Trump raises more money and may likely shoot up in the polls as a result of the latest federal charges against him. These people are nuts, and they're losing it, and we're going to figure out why with Dr. Carole. She joins us next. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
What can he offer prosecutors other than his confession, his cooperation? I mean, this is a crime he could only commit because he was in high public office. Spiro Agnew used that as a get out of jail free card. It was not just that he was vice president. It was that prosecutors assumed he was about to become president because Nixon was teetering. They were right. And in order to keep Agnew out, they traded him essentially jail time for his resignation. I'm not saying that's what the DOJ should agree to. I'm not saying that's what Trump should try for, or that his defense should offer it. I'm not even saying if it would be good or bad for the country. I'm just saying the one other time we've dealt with this as a country, that's how we did it.
So it seems like election interference isn't anything new when it comes to the FBI and political candidates that seem poised to do something like take over a big public office. Well, just because it's not new doesn't make it right. And despite what we're seeing, the deep state, the administrative state, the media, those that are in certain positions of power seem to be losing their minds over this stuff with, the type of analysis that we're hearing here. And it always makes me think about the Trump derangement syndrome that we've heard of in the past and people have displayed from time to time. And I think right now we're seeing it en masse. I want to talk about that with America's psychiatrist, Dr. Carole Lieberman. Welcome back.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. So let's dig into this a little bit because, and I mean this both tongue in cheek, but really from a serious perspective, I feel like there is I don't know how to say it, but like a massive case of paranoia that Trump is actually not going away. The way they want him to go away. And it seems like this panic is spreading among certain people where they sound scared as they're speaking. And I'm thinking, are they really that scared of Trump or are they scared of losing power?
Well, it's kind of the same thing. The Obama-Biden White House is just amping up, as they see Biden's numbers falling and Trump's numbers rising. They are, yes, Trump derangement syndrome, absolutely. This was, I sat and watched the whole thing, as I'm sure you did, the day of the arraignment. And what came to my mind was shock and awe because, not that this was, I'm not trying to say that it was as bad in a sense as 9/11 where 3,000 people died, but right. It's the same because just like 9/11 where we couldn't have even conceived of something like that happening, this too came, I know you just were talking about some things that happened in the past, but still, really, I don't think any of us would have, it's one thing for E.G. and Carole to claim rape. It's another thing, for Trump to be indicted on all of these charges. For
sure.
So we're all kind of shocked. I
agree. I think the Spiro Agnew thing was a vice president and it was following Watergate and it was a sloppy thing. And again, I only know what I know from history. But this is the legitimate, or I should say illegitimate, but it's literally what we're watching. Indictment and an arraignment of a immediate past president of the United States, which I think we've never seen. And for many in the country, it's a traumatic thing to watch. And for others that are celebrating it, I think they need to be on Dr. Carroll's couch even more than the rest of us do, who are, trying to get over it.
Because they might be happy, to see this happen to Trump, but what they're not realizing is how it is affecting them, regardless of what party they belong to, what candidate they support. All of these things we've been seeing our rights, our freedoms, our American traditions, family values, all of the above, gradually being eroded. And, this is just taking it to the next level. And so it's, even if people hate Trump and then they go, great, he's going to be locked up and he's not going to be president and all of that. Really? Well, even if that did happen, or especially if that did happen, you would be in really deep trouble because, that means that they could come for you next, and they will. Trump said several times, he has said this quote, I am the only one who can save this nation because they are not coming after me. They are coming after you, and I just happen to be standing in their way. And that is really true. And, it is about taking away all our liberties.
Yeah, it's a very sad thing to watch, Dr. Carole. I mean, I, as a dad of two, I sit here and I think, my goodness, I have to kind of walk my kids through this, and they don't really care about the news, honestly. They're very young, in terms, relatively young, but eventually, like they'll circle back to me and be like, Dad, what's going on with Trump? Is he going to jail? And have to have this conversation about what's going on with this America that we, once thought was this bastion of freedom and liberty and fairness, and how we're watching so many of our governmental institutions be weaponized and politicized just for the sake of exercising raw political power and eliminating a political enemy for this election interference. And again, it's really nothing I've ever seen at this level in my lifetime. And even the historical examples we have aren't really comparable, right? They're somewhat comparable, but not really comparable. And it just, for me, I think, my goodness, there's got to be a psychological impact on America at large as a result.
Yes. For Republicans, even those who weren't committed to Trump, it is very demoralizing. It's depressing. It's many people are feeling watching all of this, helpless, angry. And the problem is not to allow yourself, or not the solution is not to allow yourself to be so overcome by this feeling of helplessness that you don't try to do something to fix it. There are things that we can do between now and the election, to join political groups and so on, and to, instead of giving up. Even I think when sometimes this just gets really bad, all this wokeism and then Trump and, who people who are willing to fight against this, like Trump is, you think if this doesn't happen and we drown in a sea of wokeness, I think to myself sometimes, well, let's see, which country should I go to? It's
right,
so
where do we go?
It's so tempting to think about going to an island somewhere. But then, I wouldn't do that because it's really more important to stay and fight for American values.
Yeah, well, I think if we're going to fight for anything, we should be fighting for American values. Folks, I want to remind you, we're on with Dr. Carole Lieberman. Now, Dr. Carole, she is the host of Dr. Carole's Couch on Real America's Voice. She is also known as America's psychiatrist, and she's always a welcome voice on our program. You may remember her. She also hosts the Terrorist Therapist podcast, and that was because she provided all of this analysis and excellent information when she wrote the book way back in the days following 9/11. On coping with terrorism. So we'll get into all of that and more. I also want to get her take on a couple of things that are in the news today. So please don't go anywhere. Our phone number, if you have a question for her, 833-4-VALDES, 833, the number 4-VALDES. And we're coming back with Dr. Carole Lieberman, America's psychiatrist. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back. It's Rich Valdez. Our guest is Dr. Carole Lieberman. You know Dr. Carole from being on this program. She is fantastic. A medical doctor, of course, master's in public health as well. She's known as America's psychiatrist. You can check out her website. She's at expertwitnessforensic.psychiatrist.com. Also, Dr. Carole hosts a TV show on Real America's Voice, Dr. Carole's Couch. And I wanted to get into a couple of things with her, and I will. But on a quick aside, everybody in this audience, if you don't know, you'll know now. many of you know that back in 2007, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And I couldn't have been happier at that time when it happened to me, because I thought I was just weird. Because I would go to the store to buy something and then buy something else and come back and be like, what happened here? And just so many weird things happened. And when I started to learn more about it, it made so much more sense. And I've always kind of not opted to go with any of the stimulant drugs. They never sat well with me. But so many people do opt for them. And there's a study out that claims that Adderall and Ritalin and other stimulants like that can actually decrease productivity in people that abuse them if they don't have ADHD. And I mean, it comes to me as something that makes a lot of sense. But researchers from the University of Cambridge and the University of Melbourne conducted the study, published just yesterday in the Journal of Science Advances, that tested the effects of the 3 smart drugs on 40 healthy participants aged 18 to 35 years old. And the quote from the journal is, "Our results suggest that these drugs don't actually make you smarter." One of the study authors suggested, and saying, because of the dopamine the drugs induce, we expect to see increased motivation, as they do motivate one to try harder. However, we discovered that this exertion caused more erratic thinking. And if you have ADHD, you already have erratic thinking, right? You're like here 1 minute, there next minute, going over here, going back over here. So that's the last thing you need is more erratic thinking. It's funny to think that medicine would cause that in people, because I know people take this all the time to get through medical school, to get through this, to get through that. I took it, and while it helped a little bit, it caused more issues and made me feel a lot less comfortable, almost like I wasn't myself. But my point is, I thought this was a very interesting thing. Dr. Carole, what are your thoughts on regular people, a.k.a. normies, that don't have ADHD, taking Ritalin and Adderall and things like that?
I am very much against it, because I have seen, firsthand what happens. And yes, they do not make you smarter. They do make your motor go faster. In other words, they're like, they are amphetamines. And so they make you go faster. They can sometimes make you feel more confident. So then you do study more. Some of those things work. However, there is a downside. For a lot of people, I mean, I was an expert witness on a case of one person who was given Adderall, and he may have had it. A lot of times doctors give these pills out without doing tests. There are actually psychological tests that you give, and you may have taken those to determine if somebody, yes, that's like the right way to do it.
It's actually a rather involved series of tests that they gave me.
Yes. But most doctors these days just kind of give it out like candy. And so it's a high feeling. And especially if you don't really have ADHD. And so that can get people, they found that when kids are given this, even if they do really have ADHD, it makes them more vulnerable when they get to be teenagers to getting addicted to drugs. And in this case that I was saying about this young man who was given Adderall, it can put people into a manic phase. And that's what it did for him. And he spent all his parents' money, and he got into a car accident. And, the reason why I saw him is because he was suing the doctor. And so I was his expert witness. So really bad things, there are bad things that can happen from that. There are some drugs that are a little less, turn people less into a manic phase. And then that's another thing. If someone has underlying mania, manic depressive illness, they're even more susceptible to this. So I am not a big fan. There are other things. There are behavioral things that you can do to be able to concentrate more and so on. It's very tempting. Believe me, it's the celebrities, a lot of celebrities, not so much, you don't hear about it so much now, but there was a time when Britney Spears, for example, and some other celebrities were on these meds. Not that they necessarily had ADHD, but they would take these kinds of meds during the day, and then they would take they somehow they combined it with alcohol so that they would feel sleepy after drinking a lot of alcohol, and then they would take these hours later. They would take these drugs to sort of wake up. Also, they were taking it to lose weight. During this period, I was getting lots of phone calls from people who wanted me to prescribe, all of a sudden they had ADHD and they wanted me to prescribe.
They had a few extra pounds.
They what?
They had a few extra pounds, so they're like, hey, I have ADHD.
Exactly. And when they came to see me and I said, well, you have to take these tests, I was referring them out to a psychologist for these psychological tests that you just said are very, it's a whole battery of tests. When they heard that they had to go through that and they were going to be found out that they didn't have ADHD, then, they weren't interested anymore. I'm sure they went to another psychiatrist who gave them the pills.
Do you think that this is part of the reason that these pills are so hard to find for people? And like I said, I've opted not to take them. I tried various stimulants at the time, and they tried to titrate it. And for me, it was just like I didn't like that feeling at all of being high, of speeded up. I'm speedy enough as it is. My brain is always on 1,000. So I don't need more of that. And I guess, they tried to figure out the right capacity to make me regular. And I didn't like regular. So I ended up trying one of the non-stimulants, and it actually worked. And I felt regular for probably about a month or even 2 months. And it was really cool to be able to sit through like 8. At the time, I worked in higher ed. And believe it or not, in higher ed, there are instances where you have like 2 back-to-back 4-hour meetings that make up your 8-hour day. That sounds like cruel and unusual punishment for most people, especially if you have ADHD. And I was able to sit through those without shaking my leg, without, looking at my phone, without going to the bathroom, just zeroed in. It was amazing. I felt like Superman. But I felt like I was a different person. I was just like, I don't like any of this. So I eventually, the non-stimulant that they had prescribed, although it working, it didn't work for long. And I had to take more. And eventually they're like, we have to up the dosage. It'll probably raise your blood pressure, but we'll give you another pill for that. And I was like, you know what? How about we just scrap all the pills and I'll just go back to shaking my leg and going to the bathroom, because, and looking at my phone and interrupting people and just doing what I do, because it was just too much. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
But my question was,
everybody
go ahead.
Everybody is very different. And what you really have, some people, it's like, it's counterintuitive. For some people, like you would think if you're speedy, then why would you take something to speed you up more? Now, for some people that works, but for other people, it has to be, something to slow you down. So it really takes a lot of careful monitoring by the psychiatrist to figure out what works for you.
Now, Dr. Carole, what I was going to say, that whole setup was for me to ask this question, that there are a lot of people that are using Adderall for, like you said, I know that there are people out there that abuse Adderall to go out and binge drink and then take an Adderall so they could be sober on the way home. There are people that do this to just focus for whatever reason without having ADHD. And because it's so accessible through online doctors and whatnot, do you think that this is the reason why there's a national shortage for all the people that actually need it?
Maybe. The real problem isn't the real problem that we have foreign countries like China producing our medication. That's the big mistake that we have. It's not just ADHD medication. It's so many cancer medications. I was just reading about that the other day, that people can't get the medications they need for cancer because it's made in other countries and they're not making it fast enough, or it's, political or whatever. I mean, this is a terrible situation to be in. We should be making it ourselves.
I agree with that 100%. Folks, we're on with Dr. Carole Lieberman, and she's with us for another segment. We're going to continue this conversation. Speaking of other countries, there were 4 kids that were abandoned or stuck or stranded in a rainforest. I want to find out about the psychological impacts of that. We're going to discuss that coming up straight ahead. Plus your phone calls, 833-4-VALDEZ, 833-4-VALDEZ.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
Well, thank you, Rich, and thank you for everything. I know you very well, and I listen, but I have a lot of people that listen, and they love your show, and I appreciate it very much.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
So there are new details that have emerged on how 4 Colombian kids survived in the Amazon jungle for 40 days after a deadly plane crash. Now, they were siblings, ages 11 months through 13 years old. So you're talking 13, 9, 4, and just under a year old. They hid in tree trunks to avoid snakes and animals and mosquitoes. And they're part of the Hutoto indigenous group. And the oldest of these kids possess some skills, like Boy Scout skills, to survive in this environment. And it's a remarkable story, but their parents were said to have died. First, the dad died, I believe, in a plane crash. They were on a small plane. And then afterwards, the mom died. And now, there are some reports that, there was a dog that helped them live. I mean, it is such an amazing tale. And all I could think of was, wow, does this make them stronger as adults when they grow up? Or is this like a major psychological impairment? I tend to think that, what doesn't kill them makes them stronger. But Dr. Carole, what say you?
Well, yes, these kids are amazing. I mean, what they survived, not only, of course, the hardship of food and water and, knowing how to be able to survive in those kinds of conditions, but also to see their mother dead. She supposedly lived for about 4 days, and then she died, and then the pilot died, and there was somebody else on the plane who died. So it wasn't just about having enough water and food, but, realizing, living with the grief of your parent dying. What's interesting, though, you mentioned the father. There are different stories about why they were in the plane to begin with. One of the stories is that the father, at least the father of 2 of them, had cheated on the mother, and he moved away. But he had given the mother hope that they might get back together. And she took the kids to go to the father, this father, the 2, in the hopes that they could get back together. And then this happened. But the father is telling, this same father that I'm talking about, there are 4 kids, so there's other fathers,
right.
1 or 2 other fathers. But anyhow, he's telling people all different stories. He said that they were trying to get away from, a group of people who would make them join their group, like a militant group, and that's what they were trying to get away from. I mean, I just hope that the kids are not given back to this father, because he really seems like he's making hay out of this. They're getting all this attention, all this praise, as they well deserve. And he is, all of a sudden, he's there. He deserted them, but now he's there.
Right, they're getting away from him, and he's back in the mix.
Right. No, he was the one who got away from them. He abandoned them. But now he's here because they're getting all this attention, and, there's probably going to be all different opportunities for the kids. And now all of a sudden he's back in their life. And supposedly also he was physically abusive to the mother. So I hope some other relatives get the custody of these kids.
Horrible. Now, when people endure this type of trauma, what's been your experience on, and I guess everybody's different in how they deal with it, but something this traumatic, being involved in an accident, seeing your mom pass away and others around you, and you being, is this one of those situations where they might deal with survivor's guilt?
Oh, yes. Certainly in regard to their mother, and even the other 2 who they weren't necessarily close with, but just seeing them, like, for example, the pilot. So the pilot was helping them to go where they wanted to go, and now he died. So there's, there would even be guilt about him. Typically when there's some kind of trauma, depending upon how stable psychologically the person was before the trauma, that will determine how well they are able to cope with the trauma and what kind of an impact the trauma will have on them, the healthier they were to begin with. Now, here we're talking about a 1-year-old child. Presumably the child was well cared for by its mother, but he didn't have a lot of experience to develop coping mechanisms, at 1 year old. But I think what this shows, though, just from the beginning, the fact that they were able to survive in all these creative ways and to really be smart about it, and the fact that they survived together will be a very strong bond that they developed, and will help each of them to overcome this and to make them stronger. That this will actually help them to feel like they can overcome anything in life.
The resilience of a child. Folks, Dr. Carole Lieberman is truly an expert on this stuff. She's an expert witness, not just because that's her website, expert witness, forensic-psychiatrist.com, but because she truly is America's psychiatrist. Dr. Carole, I want to thank you for being here with us. Hopefully you'll join us again soon. You always have such great insight.
Sure. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. And folks, when we continue, we will be getting to your calls and so much more. Plus, we're going to talk about a new law that's coming out in the next hour, where parents are going to be held liable for child abuse if they don't teach their kids about the LGBTQ curriculum that one school is considering imposing as a state law. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. Don't go anywhere. I'm Rich Valdez.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, 833-4-VALDEZ, getting to your calls all throughout the evening. Let's go to Mary, St. Joseph, Missouri, listening on KMA out of Iowa. Mary, welcome.
Hello, Rich. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for taking my call, and thank you so much for having Dr. Lieberman on your show. She hit a topic that's very dear to my heart. I worked with psych patients I think I've told you before, I'm a retired RN, and I worked in psych for quite a number of years. Mm-hmm. And on our unit, almost invariably, we would have young adults on there that had been on some of these medications throughout their childhood, and they had turned to experimenting with drugs, most of which were methamphetamines. And our methamphetamine use in this area skyrocketed.
Wow.
Skyrocketed.
And now you're finding, like, you're talking about people abusing Adderall to like speed to get high that way?
Yeah. No, I'm talking about meth labs started up with people that were on Ritalin and Strattera and Adderall when they were children.
Wow. Fascinating. That is fascinating. Yeah, I could never imagine being like, hey, I can't get my Strattera. Quick, get me to the local meth lab. But I'm sure that's a thing. I mean, the same way people start, popping Oxy and then move on to heroin. It's a crazy thing, the way gateway drugs work. Thank you always for your insight on that, Mary. That's something I didn't know, and I appreciate you bringing that to us. Big shout out to everybody in St. Joseph, Missouri, and everybody listening out on KMA in Iowa and the surrounding area. We'll be right back. I'm Rich Valdez. Don't go anywhere.
Live from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez. America's favorite late night talk program, featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez with an S, your liberty-loving Latino amigo. Happy to be here with you. Give us a call, 833-4-VALDEZ, 833, the number 4, and my last name, Valdes. Now, Biden was talking about railroad today, saying it was going to go across the Indian Ocean. Now, a lot of people making fun of him on social media for that. But a bigger headline here is that a majority of American voters believe that Biden engaged in bribery. According to a new poll released Wednesday by the Trafalgar Group, 53.3% of respondents believed that the Biden family had accepted bribes from foreign officials. 53% of those interviewed. That's a lot. Like, really, like a lot, right? I mean, think about that for a second. Crazy. Now, in the last hour, I mentioned something. And again, this has everything to do with the Biden administration and how weak they've been on border security and cracking down on human smuggling, trafficking, etc. But again, the latest creative way to sneak human beings across the border, put them in fake, or what they're calling cloned FedEx vehicles, right? Fake FedEx trucks to sneak the migrants into the U.S. And again, this happened in Santa Teresa, which is El Paso area. And 26 illegal immigrants were brought into El Paso, Texas, and intercepted by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol when they were tipped off that they'd be coming in on these fake FedEx trucks. And they caught them. But that's not the only way that trafficking goes on. In fact, there's trafficking that goes on all across the place, all across the country, all across the globe. And Secretary Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, was speaking on that today, and we have a clip of it. I want you to listen to this.
Its purpose is to showcase successful efforts to prevent trafficking, to identify areas where countries are falling short and have more work to do, and ultimately, to eliminate trafficking altogether.
Now, you would think that Blinken would be really pointing at a map of the United States when he says countries that are falling short. Now, I'm sure there are other bigger and worse culprits out there, but clearly we're falling short. Now, kudos to the Border Patrol that caught the people on the fake FedEx trucks. But this happens way too often in the United States. Now, Blinken continued, listen to this.
More than 27 million people around the world are denied that right. Trafficking harms our societies, weakening the rule of law, corrupting supply chains, exploiting workers, fueling violence. And it disproportionately impacts traditionally marginalized groups, women, LGBTQI+ individuals, persons with disabilities, ethnic and religious minorities.
Now, what Secretary Blinken is talking about right now is something called the U.S. Trafficking Report, which right now, today, highlighted cyber scams and exploited boys. This is the annual U.S. State Department report listing 24 countries in the lowest tier for human trafficking protections. Crazy stuff. The United States put out their report showing an increase in forced labor schemes related to the COVID-19 pandemic and a years-long uptick in the exploitation of boys. If it's years long, get on it. Protect these kids. Anyway, in a speech with respect to what they're talking about, this trafficking speech, Anthony Blinken stressed the need for partnerships between governments, NGOs, and civil society, in particularly tech organizations, to address a sex and labor trafficking problem that's global. Saying the United States is committed to combating human trafficking because it represents an attack on human rights and freedoms, in addition to what you heard him say on the audio he played. Now, there's 24 countries that rank lowest for these protections. They call them Tier 3 countries, and they are Afghanistan, China, Venezuela, Turkmenistan, Myanmar, Belarus, Syria, Iran, North Korea, and those are the ones that are amongst the top. And they regularly rank in this category of being the worst. But some countries that were previously on the list were downgraded, including Algeria, Chad, Equatorial Guinea, Papua New Guinea, and one other one were upgraded. Or excuse me, were downgraded. The ones that were upgraded were Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei, who've actually improved in providing more protections. So fascinating that this is actually what's going on right now. And I think to myself, it's a shame that they're trafficking children, boys in particular. We see this happening, sadly, all over the world, and the United States is not getting any better. But it's not just children and for labor and for sex, but it's also body parts. Yep. Several people, 7 in fact, were charged with trafficking body parts that were stolen from Harvard Medical School's morgue. This is a crazy story. Now, these people include the morgue manager at Harvard Medical School, and they were arrested and charged with stealing and selling human remains from the mortuaries at the Ivy League school. The arrests involved an underground network that robbed corpses, including the bodies of 2 stillborn infants. Isn't that crazy? A, what do you want with all these dead people? And B, what do you want dead infants for? Cedric Lodge, 55 years old, allegedly stole the remains from the university morgue where he worked and sold the body parts online with the help of his wife, Denise, 63 years old. Who'd they sell them to? Their associates, Katrina McLean, 44 years old, Joshua Taylor, 46 years old, and Matthew Lampe, 52 years old. Officials said one of Lampe's clients was Jeremy Pauly, who bought and sold body parts along with him. The two of them exchanging more than $100,000 in stolen, trafficked, dead human body parts. Pauly eventually led detectives to Candace Chapman Scott, who's accused of stealing cadavers slated for cremation in Little Rock and selling them to Mr. Pauly in Pennsylvania. Like with the Lodge's operation, many of the bodies that Scott is accused of selling belong to those who donated them for scientific research. Unbelievable. Crazy, right? You can't believe the story. As I'm saying, I'm like, I can't even get the words out. But then I'm looking at a picture of the guy, one of the guys that they caught buying, right? This guy, Jeremy Pauly, is accused of buying about $100,000 in stolen human remains. You got to see what this guy looks like. Looks like he's, 20s, 30s, maybe 40s at the most. He's got and I'm not against tattoos per se, but he's pretty much tattooed entirely on half his face, including his eyeball. Like the white part of his eyeball is black, and piercings everywhere, even the little horns at the top of his head. I mean, just a scary looking dude. I will share this one on social media so you could see what this guy looks like. What a weirdo he looks like. But that's what's going on. We're trafficking boys in America. We're trafficking humans at the border with fake FedEx trucks, and we are now trafficking stolen human remains, body parts. People are buying these things for what? I don't know. They can't use them in transplants. It's not a medical emergency. What are they doing with these body parts? That's what I'd like to know. Anyway, we'll get into that a little bit more down the road, maybe in hour number 3. But right now I want to talk about some of the harm that's being done to our children by way of making laws that neuter the parents so that they're charged with child support, flashbacks for me, with child abuse if they don't support a state bill that's forcing the LGBTQI plus curriculum and all of the crazy that accompanies that, if they don't accept that to be pushed down their throats. Crazy stuff is happening at different state houses across the country, and we're going to get with Tony Kinnett. He's an investigative columnist at the Daily Signal, and he's going to explain everything to us right after this.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. America at Night with Rich
I looked at the Dodgers code of conduct, I'm like, look, or the Dodgers fan code of conduct, and it said you cannot wear anything or say anything that goes against anybody's age, gender, creed, religion. And at that point, it was like, this is going against their code of conduct. It's a blatant anti-Catholic message that they're sending, regardless of how much, quote unquote, good they've been doing in their community. But when I saw how deeply offensive it was, doing awful things to the cross, doing awful things about Stations of the Cross, like it became a point where these negatives are not, they shouldn't be honored, and they shouldn't mock a certain group.
All right, so there you have it. That's Trevor Williams. He's a pitcher with the Washington Nationals. He was on EWTN just yesterday talking about the controversy that occurred at Dodger Stadium a few weeks ago, where they brought in transsexual nuns, right, or cross-dressing transsexuals posing as nuns. I forget what their name was, Sisters of something or other. Maybe if you guys could find that in the studio, let me know. But their point was this was a protest. They were LGBTQ activists, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. And this was their act of protest or free speech or whatever, what have you, at Dodger Stadium. And it was taken the wrong way by many that espoused a Catholic or Christian faith. And again, rightfully so. I mean, everybody's entitled to do what they want. And if that's what the Dodgers want to do, then people have a right to say, hey, I don't know if I want to engage with the Dodgers anymore. But this is just one of many examples coming out of California, but this happens everywhere, where we're seeing an agenda continually pushed upon people. And it comes as no surprise that there's now a California bill that would charge any parent who doesn't affirm transgenderism, and they'll charge the parent with child abuse. Now, this proposal to me is insane, but it makes sense. When we think about this, and I'm not saying I agree with it, I'm saying it makes sense from the perspective of the transgender activist. Ultimately, they're going to look at everybody and say, why aren't you trans? And if you're not, what's wrong with you, right? This is where they're trying to get. They're trying to normalize this to the point where the ostracized become what are considered the normal, right? Or the mainstream, right? Those that believe that men should marry women and women should marry men, or that men are men or women are women. And to me, this is just, it's crazy, right? I can't think of another way to describe it. Thankfully, my job's to tell the truth. And when I heard that there's this law, that it's a recently amended California bill that would add affirming to the sexual transition of a child and add that to the state's standard for parental responsibility and child welfare, this would make any parent who doesn't affirm transgenderism for their child guilty of child abuse under this California state law. And this is crazy. The law, AB 957, it passed California's assembly on May 3rd, but a co-sponsor amended it after hours in California State Senate on June 6th. So we continue to see what's going to happen with that. But I want to bring in Tony Kinnett because he's written an article on this in the Daily Signal, and he's got his finger on the pulse of what's going on. Tony Kinnett, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Rich.
Yes, sir. So let's get to the bottom of this, because I think this is crazy talk, and you can take your time with it. We're going to do a couple of segments on it, because I think, while this is a specific story about a California bill, this is, by and large, a big problem facing Americans in every state. Would you agree?
It absolutely is, because up until this point in time, there's been this weird slide down from, what you talked about, the normal standard for human biology, in which men would mate with women, and that was how things would be carried out throughout our species. We've now started, going down this long, weird, dark tunnel to where definitions are meaningless. Well, there's a problem. When you start making definitions meaningless, you can't really enforce laws. You can't actually set standards. So the left has backed themselves into this weird corner. Remember, only a few years ago, they were saying that well, you're not exactly born gay, but you are born gay if you are gay. And so therefore we need to make all of these laws and things of that nature. Now we're coming to the trans question and listening to State Senator Scott Wiener, who's one of the co-sponsors of AB 957, tell a crowd of parents that we need to not give any kind of testimonies against a bill that would affirm transgenderism because that is erasing trans children. And then he said erasing gay and lesbian children, which as a former biology teacher kind of shocked me because, again, the entire idea of the gay movement was that you can sexually love whoever you want. My question to State Senator Scott Wiener would be, what children are you talking to that are expressing sexual desires? And why on God's green earth are we encouraging it? And that's specifically what AB 957 encourages parents to do. It encourages parents to affirm the gender expression, not just quote unquote transgenderism, kind of the catch-all term, but if your child comes up to you and says they are two-spirit, you are required to affirm them, whatever that means. And if you don't, you are withholding a basic need from your child, like food, water, shelter. And the state of California could take your kids away from you. If you're a local business, a school can't withhold certain basic needs from kids, neither can a church or hospital with kids in their care. And the state would be able to, under the new, completely rewritten California Family Code, charge you or your business or your church with child abuse because you didn't tell that child that what they were pretending they are or what they thought they were was in fact reality. It is bizarro world doesn't even begin to describe it. And I've looked through policy for years. I've worked in education for years. I've never seen such a deep spiral down the slippery slope than we're currently in. So much so that it drove one California state senator who'd been in the legislature for 11 years to tell fellow Californians to flee the state if they loved their children. Have you ever heard of a state senator telling his constituents to get out?
No, but thank God he did. And I'm glad I don't live in California. This is some crazy stuff. Like I said, it's literally crazy town. Tony Kinnett, stick with us. I want to continue getting into this because the only response that I can think of right now is a couple of expletives that the FCC won't allow. So I'll blurt those out during the break, and we're going to come back to this because it's insane to think that this is actually happening. Folks, we're on with Tony Kinnett. He's with the Daily Signal, investigative columnist there. And you can get him on Twitter at @TheTonus, TheTonus. And we're talking about a California bill that would charge any parent who doesn't affirm transgenderism, well, it would charge him with child abuse. Plus, there's another crazy story out of California that we're going to get to. So don't go anywhere. Don't move a muscle. Keep it locked right here. I am Rich Valdez. Our guest, Tony Kinnett. We're talking about the attack on parents and children, and we're coming right back. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
In recent years, we have put government bureaucrats between parents, children, and doctors when it comes to medical care. And now we have this where if a parent does not support the ideology of the government, they're going to be taken away from the home. Now, I agree with both Senator Wiener and Senator Laird that today it only involves divorce proceedings. And frankly, a judge can already factor this in. But I can assure you it's not going to end with divorce proceedings. In the past, when we've had these discussions and I've seen parental rights atrophied, I've encouraged people to keep fighting. I've changed my mind on that. If you love your children, you need to flee California. You need to flee. We are moving towards the pathway of the Handmaid's Tale. California is becoming the new Gilead, and it just breaks my heart. I'm born and raised in this state. I love this state. I'm not going to stay in this state because it's just too oppressive, and I believe in freedom, and so I'm going to move to America when I leave the legislature.
He's moving to America. God bless him. That's State Senator Scott Wilk, a Republican from California, at a hearing on Tuesday, urging parents to flee California over this bill we're discussing, which forces parents to teach gender transition and everything that goes along with it to their children, or eventually be held liable for child abuse. Our guest, Tony Kinnett, he's an investigative columnist with the Daily Signal, and he's written a piece on this. And Tony Kinnett, we were just talking about this before the break. This is truly amazing. Thank God for this guy being like a modern day Paul Revere and really sticking up for parents. But, you know, crazy, right? I mean, it's absolutely crazy that you've got politicians saying, you love your kids, get out of here. Get out of here. Tony Kinnett, what say you?
It's unprecedented, that's for sure. But I think I'll put a little bit more of a cautionary tale, kind of a tagline there to the end of what he's saying. And that is, what progressives see they can get away with in California, they will try to do in each and every state, in each and every local government across the country, not just in the blue states, not just in Illinois and Washington and New York, not just in the battleground states, your Wisconsins, your Missouris, your well, I guess now Georgia, sort of, but also your deep red states. They're trying this already in states like Indiana. They're trying this in other red states like Idaho, and they will continue trying whatever they think they can get away with, because this has become a religion to them. They are more devoted to this strange, weird life obsession with sexualization and this hedonistic nonsense than most Americans are with the day-to-day. It truly is something that we all need to keep an eye on, because it's not going away anytime soon.
Now, Tony Kinnett, I want to ask you a question, and, you know, no pressure, but I think this comes down to two things. One, this is how Marxists typically operate, right? They find an issue that can work as a wedge, and they will drive it, like worker versus employee, employee trying to unionize, whatever, and what have you, the government versus the capitalist, and that's typical MO for them. But another part of this, with the hypersexualization part, is this guy Alfred Kinsey, who seems to have made a lot of disciples along the way in his crazy talk, not the least of them, which was this guy Daniel Carlton Gajicek. And Gajicek famously said that children who are not participating in intergenerational sex in their families and helping with sex in the family home are missing out. Now, these are sick, perverted, demonic people. But I feel like you've got the mix of these two, the crazies on the left that want kids to have sex with adults, and the crazies on the left that think that Marx is their God. And voila, here we've arrived today. Am I oversimplifying? Am I missing something? What say you?
You're not oversimplifying. To point out Kinsey, remember, Kinsey also founded the Kinsey Institute, which is a wing of the Indiana University that focused on, later on they claimed they focused on sexual health, but some of the sexual experiments that came out of that wing of the university were so atrocious that, like your mention of the FCC last time, I certainly can't mention those on the air. Thank God the Indiana legislature did finally pull funding from them. But I think that your comment about children being encouraged to sexually experiment is not just related to just any adult in general. The rise in searches for incest pornography in the last 5 years in this country has risen by a factor of 12. So that is a ridiculously high logarithmic climb for individuals who are interested in incest, individuals who are interested also in things like child pornography and the many different ways that that's created and distributed and also drawn and now AI generated as well. It is on the rise so fast now that departments of the U.S. government, if they pay any attention to it, which is starkingly little, they say it is so pervasive now, it is difficult for them to even begin to track. And this is this idea that comes out of a society who has long since become complacent with how the rest of society upholds the moral standard. I go back to what Tucker Carlson said the other day on his Tucker on Twitter, and when he talked about how as a society we used to hold these community taboos. And if anyone ever touched a child, that person would just disappear. You didn't have to wait for the police to get involved. That rapist would be gone they would cease to exist, to quote the doctor from Back to the Future. So I kind of look around and wonder at this point, of course, I'm not encouraging vigilantism, but I am wondering as a society, where are the taboos that we used to hold? Why have we become so complacent that we see something on the news, we see something terrible like what's going on in California, and not just with this bill, like you said, earlier with the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence and that mockery to Christianity that was portrayed at the Dodger Stadium. At what point is that actually enough for us to take action? At what point is that actually enough for us to collectively as a society say that's enough? Because so far, Republicans, conservatives, independents, they kind of grumble and mumble about it. They may even give kind of a half-hearted boycott attempt, but what really happens? I mean, you heard Paul Ryan get up in front of a large news studio and say he doesn't get involved in the culture war. I worked for Governor Walker's office. I've met Paul Ryan more times than I can count. And to hear someone that I had worked with back when I was preparing briefs for the Wisconsin governor, will get up in front of people and say, I just kind of whistle past the graveyard when it comes to children drag shows. That's too polarizing. Look, if you're too worried about coming out against children drag shows because that's too polarizing, forget being in politics. You shouldn't be out walking among us. I don't want to associate with you. This would be something that we all universally agree on, not something that's a battleground state issue.
Yeah, listen, I refuse to believe that guys like my dad, I can tell, and again, nobody here knows my dad, but my dad was not a political guy in any way. He could care less. But if he saw something happening to a kid, saw a drag queen like taking kids somewhere for like circle time in a storybook, I can guarantee you my dad would be like, what the F? And go over there and break it up and be like, where's your parents? What's going on? Get out of here, bro. And he would probably start a fight with the guy because and again, he's not a gay basher. It was because that's just not appropriate, right? That was not a normal thing for anybody to see in his generation. Now, God rest his soul, he's not here, but where are those guys, right? What happened to that? And I realized that we've undergone this barrage of feminization and emasculation, and so much has happened in recent years to get us to this place. But like you said, at what point? What is the straw that breaks the camel's back? And is there a straw anymore? Is there a straw heavy enough to break this damn camel's back? Or will we just take everything and accept it for what it is in the name of whatever? I don't know the answer to it. I'd love for the callers to weigh in on that. 833-4-VALDEZ. Something else that you said, Tony Kinnett, what I thought was really interesting is how we've gone away from these taboos. And I don't know if we get back to them because I think that was where the damage was done. We've worked so hard to erase them. Anyway, stick around with us. I got to take a pause right here. We're coming right back. We're with Tony Kinnett talking about something I think is very important because if it happens in California, it will happen in your neighborhood next. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
My transmasculine friends were showing off their top surgery scars and living in joy, and I wanted to join them. And because it is perfectly within the law in Washington, D.C., I decided to join them and cover my nipples just to play it safe because I wanted to be fully free and myself. I had zero intention of trying to be vulgar or be profane in any way. I was simply living in joy, living my truth, and existing in my body. Happy Pride, free the nipple.
And that is Rose Montoya responding to the White House now banning Rose Montoya from participating in future White House events because they were taking selfies with the President of the United States, Joe Biden, in one scene, and the next scene they were topless in the ellipse of the White House on the lawn there. It just absolutely disgraceful. Not that they were topless per se, but that they were topless at the White House. You just don't do that, right? I mean, who does that? Well, obviously, Rose Montoya did with a couple of her trans activist friends. And again, that was just something that happened over the weekend. But overall, we're talking about how the trans activists are having their way, getting their way with everything. We're on with Tony Kinnett from the Daily Signal. And he's written this piece about how parents are getting the short end of the stick and might be charged with child abuse if, in fact, they don't support teaching their children about transgenderism. You've got a state senator telling people, if you love your kids, get the heck out of California. And I want you guys to weigh in. Let's go to your calls. Our guest, again, Tony Kinnett, is on the line with us, investigative columnist at the Daily Signal. Let's go to Andrew calling from Sebring, Florida, WWTK. Go right ahead.
Hey, Rich, I just wanted to tell you guys, as far as, are there people who still, do something about this themselves? Where I'm from in Jamaica, not so long ago, I witnessed something as such, and I thought it was very empowering. There was a gentleman going around the neighborhood, and he had gotten to quite a few women, raping them. And the guys in the neighborhood, we have cops and everything, but, not such a great thing. The guys in the neighborhood set up for that fella, and they found him. And I remember 6 a.m. just hearing a tumble of people going down the street, and I get up and to go see what's going on too. And they had this guy up on a light pole, okay, with his hands behind his back, his genitals in his mouth, and he was done. And nothing said about that. We call it jungle law, sir. It's the best thing ever.
Wow. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, again, I'd probably get in trouble if I endorsed something like that, so I won't do that on the air. But I will say...
Can't endorse that one, but,
I won't do it, but damn, he shouldn't have done it either.
Yeah, when I hear that a convicted rapist or child molester passes away in prison, let's say due to ground glass in his food. My dad used to tell me stories like that when I was growing up about those kind of things would happen to men in prison. Whenever I hear a story like that, do I endorse what happens? No. Do I smile reflexively? Perhaps. There's something about someone receiving justice for especially heinous crimes that, it's the reason there's just a little something to that, I
totally get that. Tony Kinnett, let everybody know where they can find you, how they can keep up with the work that you're doing, and read the articles that you're putting out on the Daily Signal.
You can read all of my latest work at dailysignal.com. You can find me over on Twitter at thetonus, TheTonus. My DMs are open. Talk to a lot of parents and teachers all the time, making sure that we expose a lot of this nonsense so that you know what's going on in your community.
Outstanding. Well, I love the work you're doing. Keep up the good work, and Godspeed to you. Hope to have you back soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on again, Rich.
You bet, Tony. Now, folks, straight ahead, we're going to get to your calls. I see we've got calls from New Jersey, calls from Florida, and more coming in. We're going to get to that right now. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
I want to listen to you, Rich, all the time.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, continuing with your calls. And again, I want to remind everybody, right now we're about to wrap up on this topic, but we're about to kick off Open Phone America. That's where you guys get to call in 833-4-VALDEZ and share your opinions so you can be heard all across the country. Let's go to Lance, Galloway, New Jersey, WOND. Go right ahead, sir.
Hey, good evening, Rich. I'm sorry I missed the guest, but he was right on. He definitely rung the bell with the fact that the people in charge, parents and educators, and even like he said, where's the moral fiber? Well, the moralists have dropped the ball because the last 30 years, all the deviant and heinous hiding religious figures in certain religions, Catholic, even in Presbyterian. I mean, people are, there's too many people abusing kids sexually within the different halls of prayer. That's number one. Number two, you said it's pervasive. Well, it's pervasive, it's perverted, and it's practiced, and it's condoned by the acceleration of all the different websites where kids can go on and see all sorts of vulgar things. And now you have people that in sixth grade are trying to allow people to introduce kids to transgenderism or don't deny them that right to be aware of it. Well, excuse me, if I'm not mistaken, those in charge that have been plotting to take over the whole moral fiber and destroy the Constitution, they're only setting this up for some state eventually to progress, like the use of drugs and hardcore drugs and everything and anything on the street, and there's no fines, to accept pedophilia. And that's what these people are aiming for. They want hell's bells. They want everything they can get, why they can get it. And the fact that a man and a woman still are the only two things in the human species that can do this, aside from, in vitro fertilization, to produce a child. However, even in the first 8 weeks of in vitro, that's when the child is identified as what it's going to be. So anything that's this dystopia and this disillusionment of trying to find out who your sexual identity is, well, you know what? They're only, really horrific narcissists, and all they want to do is self-pleasure. They're hedonists, and it's a shame. And parents have to protect their children no matter what, and schools should not allow that. And if they have open night, well, I guess.
But Lance, you're a former educator. I have you not noticed that schools are perpetuating this? Forget not allowing it. I have a kid that's 17 years old. She's graduating high school in several days, and that's why I try to keep it vague so she doesn't run into any trouble there. But let me tell you, she tells me this new principal we have is ushering this in. She said, we never had a transgender bathroom policy until this new principal came and felt like that was the right thing to do. So now she's forced to go to the girls' bathroom with boys that identify as girls, and they're in the bathroom, and she doesn't like it, so she has to go to the nurse's bathroom or some other bathroom where it's like a single stall type of thing. It's the educators that are ushering this in.
There are administrators and educators and even people. Remember, they're devious. They're deceitful. They know how to paint the emperor's clothes. And this is what they're doing. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. Two last things real fast, Rich. Number one, your bumper music tonight was outstanding. And number two, God bless you and your father, and may you have an enjoyable Father's Day weekend, all righty?
Oh, thank you, Lance. Very kind of you. Folks, we're coming right back. Open Phone America. Get those calls in. 833-4-VALDEZ. We're coming right back to your calls right now. Don't go anywhere.
Live from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez. America's favorite late night talk program featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S, your liberty-loving Latino amigo. Happy to be here with you. Give us a call on our late-night nationwide town hall forum, 833-4-Valdez, 833-4-Valdez is our phone number. We've talked about a number of things tonight in hours number 1 and number 2. We've had some discussion on the new bill that's being proposed in California, where if parents don't accept transgenderism and don't affirm that they'll teach that to their children, that they can in some instances be held liable for abuse, and that's going to become a state law. At least that's the consideration right now. You've got state senators saying, if you love your kids, get out of the state. I mean, it's absolute insanity what's going on there. We've also discussed the mental and psychological implications going on with people who are just super anti-Trump and flipping out that he's not in jail yet. Others that are flipping out that he got indicted. Either way, there was some psychological impact on that. So we're going to take your comments on that as well. And everything else that we've talked about tonight. Lots of news out there tonight that we've discussed, and lots more to discuss. Again, the phone number 833-4-VALDEZ. I'm going to go straight to your calls because we've had a number of people on hold for a while. Let's go to Ralph, Port St. Lucie, Florida, WPSL. Ralph, welcome.
Thank you, Rich, for your very entertaining and informative. I enjoy it to you. The question comes up, why, you're welcome. The question of why is this nonsense taking place in our country today? I'm going to read you something, and then I'll tell you where I got it. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, and they put darkness for light and light for darkness. They put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. I read that from Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20. It tells us in the Bible that we will see the time when this happens. Drag queens in the elementary school, good. Criminal in the White House, good. It's all been prophesied a long time ago. You got to remember, nothing takes God by surprise. Next time that you get angry, as I do, just keep this in mind. There will be no pride rallies in hell.
Excellent point, Ralph, and great words to live by for managing oneself, one's own pride, and like the Bible says, pride comes before the fall. Thank you, Ralph, in Port St. Lucie on WPSL for your kind words and your words of wisdom as well. Let us continue across the country here. Let's go to Reading, Pennsylvania, WEEU. Let's go to Katie. Hey, Katie, you're on with Rich Valdez. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. I just have a couple of things I'd like to say. One, regarding all this southern border invasion stuff. I have to wonder, where are all the white supremacist groups that we're supposed to have in the country? If there's
Why aren't they doing anything about this?
Right, it's like, hello. That's like, I just keep wondering that. And then the other thing is, I know it's going to sound strange, but it is strange. Remember back in, I think it was the 60s or other group times, like maybe the 50s, the government was doing experiments on people with drugs and not really telling them that this is an experiment. It kind of makes me wonder if whatever was happening during those drug tests and stuff, is that like something that passed down through, from grandfather to grandson and so on and so forth? Because with all the anger and the weird things going on now, could that be, a reason maybe?
Fascinating question. And I'll start with the first one. I just want to address both points that you made. The first point that you made was, the FBI and many on the left and of our political spectrum say that the biggest threat facing America are white supremacist groups, right? These violent domestic extremists. And you're saying, we got all this drama at the border, and these people typically, they hate anybody that's coming and threatening their white way of life. Then where are these white supremacists, and why aren't they securing the border? It's an excellent point, and not that I support that. It's just that it makes all the sense in the world that we keep hearing about this threat of white supremacy, yet we can't find any of these Nazi crazies to go and lock down the border. Very, very good point. The second point is, I forget what it was called. It wasn't Operation Paperclip, but it was one of those operations conducted by the CIA where they used all these psychotropic drugs to influence people. MK Ultra, that was it. And the MK Ultra, and they say it was discontinued, and it was a project between the CIA and universities. And it makes me wonder, what makes me think that we're not doing, MK Ultra 2.0 today? But your point is equally as valid that maybe these are the children, like there was children of thalidomide. There could be children of MK Ultra, the offspring or even the grandchildren today that are manifesting it as, all sorts of crazy today because they were the product of these people that were tampered with, if you will, experimented upon. Excellent point. Very, very interesting point. Maybe we could turn that into a whole segment if I do a little research on that. Katie, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. Reading, Pennsylvania. Big shout out to you guys on WEEU. And let's see, we continue our journey across the country. Let's go to Justin, Manchester, New Hampshire, listening online. Rich Valdez, AmericaAtNight.com. Justin, go right ahead.
Rich, thank you for taking my call, as always. I really appreciate it. It's such an honor to speak with you every time, Rich. I tell you, man, those of us who are patriots, we need to stick together more than ever now. And there's just so much insanity going on. And, I have a feeling that California is just the beginning of it. And, I mean, that state's a lost cause. I don't think there's any hope for that state. I really don't. And, personally, I'm going to be brutally honest, but personally, I'm a big supporter of the death penalty. And I don't think we do enough executions, and I don't think our laws are strict enough. And I'll tell you, be honest with you, Rich, I believe that any kind of predator, rapist, any kind of predator, they should be put to death. And anyone who tries to brainwash or corrupt a child should be locked up and thrown in jail. There should be no tolerance for those kind of people. There really shouldn't be. And that's the thing. We're seeing way too much tolerance. There's no accountability anymore. And now we're seeing the result of that. I mean, like you said, it's insanity. There's no law and order. It's just anarchy now. And that's how I feel about it. And also on a side note, Rich, President Trump, he needs our support more than ever. We need to stand behind him. And, even though
I hear you
he hasn't been lying.
Well, listen to this. I'll tell you a story. I used to host a radio show from 10 a.m. to noon in New York City. And in New York, I remember I had a guest once, and it was a contrarian guest. He was arguing the affirmative that it's better to keep someone incarcerated for life than to put them on death row and execute them. And he was saying that, you put somebody on death row for 10 years or maybe 20 years. He said it's way cheaper to just keep them in jail for life. He said, even if they do 60 years. And I thought, hold on, sir. How are you telling me that it's cheaper to keep somebody in jail for 60 years versus keeping them in jail for 20 years and then killing them, or 10 years and then executing them? And he, this is a PhD, really, on paper, very smart guy, but he couldn't make an argument that I don't think anybody would buy. Ultimately, there are a group of activists out there posing as professors or professors posing as activists, however you want to phrase it, that are out there making the case that capital punishment doesn't work. And again, my argument wasn't that it was better or worse. My argument was it's just cheaper. If somebody is convicted of a crime by a jury of their peers, and again, our system isn't perfect, but it's the best one that we've got, and they're convicted, then what do? Keep them for 60 years in appeals and whatnot? I think that they have their chance, and after that, you got to go for it. So I'm with you. In with the respect to states have the right to implement capital punishment if they like, and if they do, if that's the law of the land in their state, then they should be able to do what they've got to do. And I don't think that we should create these lifelong sentences for people that have been sentenced to death, because all that does is really prolong the process, number one. And number two, that's what costs money when you're talking about $62,000 a year or whatever the latest number is to keep an inmate in a prison cell. So I just think it's crazy that we have that movement. But again, to each his own. Everybody has a right to free speech. Go for it. But I'm with you on that one, Justin. I believe that if the state has capital punishment and they're sentenced to capital punishment and convicted by a jury of their peers and have exhausted their appeals, then by all means move forward with the sentence that was imposed. But we'll see what happens. I think that's a battle that we're not going to win. I think most states rather not use the death penalty, and I respect that too. Listen, if you don't want to do it, then don't do it. But don't have it then. Change your laws, and that's that. Anyway, thank you, Justin. I appreciate the call and your kind words. Let us continue right after this break. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back. We continue with our Open Phone America extravaganza, taking your calls from all across the country. Let's go to Ken, Lansing, Michigan, WILS. Ken, go right ahead.
Hey, good evening, Rich. Jim Bohannon would be really proud of you the way you've grabbed the reins and led this horse down the path. So congrats to you, my friend.
Thank you, sir.
You're more than welcome. This moral decline in our country that's happened for the last 20 years has but literally in like the last 5, 6, 8 years has just completely blown my mind. I don't understand how 2 or 3% of the population can dictate the values and morals to the rest of America. And we have a completely worthless attorney general here in Michigan by the name of Dana Nessel, who literally...
Oh, I remember Dana Nessel. Oh, I remember her. She's a real piece of work. What a clown. Go right ahead.
Do you remember what she said at a middle school or an elementary school?
Yeah, she got in a lot of trouble for making a lot of stupid comments. Which one are you particularly referring to?
She was there at either an elementary or a junior high school, and it was Drag Queen Day. And she was literally telling the crowd that every school in Michigan should have a drag queen.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. She said every school in America, I think she said, should have a drag queen. I was like, ma'am, aren't you the attorney general? Like, why are you even talking about this? It was the craziest thing.
It just blows my mind, Rich. You know, I've got a daughter that's 20, but when she was 12, 13, and 14, and if I took her shopping anywhere, we went to a mall or a store and she had to use the bathroom, I stood outside that bathroom, and there wasn't going to be one damn boy that walked in that bathroom while my daughter was in there, and I don't give a damn what anybody said. I guess I would have went to jail before I would have allowed that boy to go in there when my daughter was in there. That's
Ken,
just the way it is.
I still do that to this day. My oldest daughter is going to be 22 in a couple of weeks. My youngest daughter will be 18 on her next birthday. And I've always done it, but I do it with more vigilance now, not because of what I hear in the news, but because of a guest we had on. I think his name was Scott Smith, and he was the dad from Loudoun County, Virginia, whose daughter went to the girls' bathroom in her high school and was sexually assaulted by a boy wearing a skirt in the high school bathroom during school hours. And I remember how, I had met him prior to having him on, and I remember how bothered he was, and rightfully so. And I thought to myself, my goodness, if your kid can't be safe in school, and then they went about covering it up, and the people who covered it up eventually got indicted. Thank God for that. But when that happened about a year and a half ago, I said, you know what? You got to look out for your kids even more than you normally do. So I think you're 100% spot on. Kudos to you for being a good dad, and thank you for the call and your kind words. Big shout out to everybody in Lansing, Michigan, WILS. Let us continue our little journey here across the country. Where do we go? Don's on the road, trucker on the road. Big shout out to all the truckers out there. Don's listening on KDKA online. Go right ahead, Don.
Rich, good evening. Good evening. Pleasure to talk with you.
Likewise. Thank you.
I have a question. Okay? So let's say that I have two young children and they take their lunch to school every day. And I fill it full of Snickers candy bars and Kit Kats and pixie sticks, and I give them a big old jug of Hawaiian punch. And they go to school every day. Don't you think somebody would say, what are you doing to your children?
Right. You're ruining your kid. They're going to become diabetic. You're going to ruin their teeth.
Yes. And I don't let my children brush their teeth or floss on a regular basis because they don't have to. Now, sooner or later, somebody is going to be after me because I am neglecting the welfare of my children. So my question is, if I'm going to get in trouble for that, and I lived in California, how am I going to get in trouble for not teaching my children what the government and the school districts of that state wants? Because I thought that we still had religious freedom in this country. Mm-hmm. Correct?
Yeah, not to mention just straight up parental rights. Even if you're an atheist, you should be able to discipline and protect your kid.
Yes. So if, let's say the state of whatever decides that they're going to push that every child becomes a sharpshooter, and if you don't teach your son or daughter how to use a high-powered rifle to do mass shootings, then I am in violation of that rule. Now, is that ridiculous also?
Absolutely crazy, absolutely ridiculous, and I would never support such a thing, Don. That would be lunacy.
But my thing is this, is that your agenda that you have in life and for your family is not my agenda that I have for my family and my life. And if you are gay or trans, you have a different agenda, but it is not mine.
Right.
But I don't have the right, the authority to push what I feel, my beliefs, even being a Christian nowadays. Oh, you're one of those people. You're a Christian. Yes, I am.
You're one of those.
I don't, you know, what do they call them? Bible thumpers. I'm not a Bible thumper. But I will,
listen, let me just go off on a quick tangent on that, Don, because you know what? We really have gotten to a place where it went from being like, oh, you're Catholic. Oh, you're a Christian. Oh, okay. That's what most people are in this country. That's fine. To being, oh, my gosh, you're one of those people. And again, it's so odd to me because everybody else is in the minority. There are still more Christians in this country than anybody else. But yet we've created this culture where it's okay to bash the Christian. It's okay to bash dads. It's okay to bash manly men. We support something now called the dad bod, which I like to call fat slob, even if I have one. Listen, if I'm a fat slob, I'm a fat slob. I'm not. Don't call me dad bod. But anyway, Don, you're 100% right on. I appreciate it. More from your calls. Straight up, don't go anywhere.
Radio 6 years in a row. It's Rich Valdez.
All right, America. So listen to this. Welcome back, by the way. Our phone number, 833-4-VALDEZ. We're going to get to your calls right now. I just want you to hear this story real quick. Human embryos created without egg or sperm in controversial breakthrough. Yep. This is a dramatic scientific first where researchers created a synthetic human embryo without using sperm or an egg. No one knows if these embryonic structures created from stem cells could develop into a viable living organism or what the organism might be like. But the breakthrough is sure to ignite furious ethical, legal, and scientific debate. Now, we had a stem cell expert on not that long ago that was talking about how, you know, he didn't support his colleagues using stem cells in the area of cloning, but also felt that artificial intelligence played a role and had a place in medicine, but disliked many of the areas. And that was a really good interview. If you miss any of the interviews ever on this program, make sure you go check it out. Rich Valdez, AmericaAtNight.com. You can subscribe to the podcast so it just pops up into your phone every day. Or you can just look for whatever you like and play it as a replay, but everything is available for you there. Rich Valdez, AmericaAtNight.com. Make sure you check that out. And anyway, these synthetic embryo models had primordial cells that would eventually develop into egg and sperm cells. So this is being reported by The Guardian UK and the New York Post. And one of the quotes here is, our human model is the first human embryo model that specifies amnion and germ cells, which are the precursor cells of egg and sperm. This is according to the California Institute of Technology professor Magdalena Zernicka-Getz. So I'll keep you posted on this one. And again, it only makes sense, we're talking about embryos and eggs, to announce that Al Pacino, the famous Hollywood actor of gangster movie fame, and his girlfriend have given birth officially, making him an 83-year-old father of 4. So congrats to Al Pacino on his new baby. He's now a father of 4 at 83 years old. God bless him. Let us continue with your calls. All right, here we go. Let's go to Jim in Marysville, Washington, listening to Rich Valdez, AmericaAtNight.com online. Go right ahead.
Hi, I heard on the local television station KOMO in Seattle tonight that police cannot arrest people who create graffiti. And I
Isn't that
think
interesting?
Another stab in the back for companies that are just leaving major cities.
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, in the Seattle area, and by the way, we're on KTTH in Seattle. If you're ever up late enough and you hear it, I'm grateful for your listenership. A great station, KTTH. But yeah, you're right. The city of Seattle announced this week that it would be stopping its enforcement of property and crimes related to graffiti in the wake of a ruling from a district court judge saying that, no, you can't pursue this. And it's interesting. The injunction was issued Wednesday by U.S. District Court Judge Marcia Peckman, asserting that Seattle's property damage laws surrounding graffiti pose a real threat to censorship. And that's part of a larger lawsuit stemming from the arrest of 4 people who were arrested for writing Black Lives Matter and anti-police slogans in chalk on concrete barriers outside SPD's East Precinct. Now, I got to tell you, your right to free speech should be limited to your sign, whatever it is, what you're holding. But if you're going to deface public property in order to have that speech, well, I think that's on you, right? If I have free speech that I want to write on the street or I want to write on police barricades, I would only expect for them to say, look, you could put it on your shirt, you could carry a sign, but you can't sit here and take what isn't yours. But that's exactly what's happening thus far with this federal judge pausing this and saying, no, we're not going to enforce that right now. Crazy stuff. Thank you for the call and for the heads up on that story, Jim in Marysville, Washington, and a big shout out to our affiliate there, KTTH. Let us continue. Where do we go from here? Let's go to stay on the West Coast. We'll stay on the West Coast. We're going to go to Michael in Pendleton, Oregon, KUMA. Go right ahead.
Yes, Rich. Hey, how you doing?
Wonderful.
I had to call in again. The topic, you always have great topics, but it kind of hits close to home. The most important thing in my life, like a lot of Americans, is my Christian Catholic faith. And I love my country. I love my fellow Americans. And they all have a right to believe the way they want to believe. And I respect that. But I feel, I'm sure not the only one that feels this way, like my faith is under attack in my church and maybe some of the other churches that my friends go to, my closest friends. And, and you mentioned last night, I wanted to add the Hispanic community. I think they're great. A lot of my friends are Hispanic, and they're such an important part of our country. I think they're a great community. I know you were mentioning about Miami and the Cuban community.
Sure.
Great people, Rich, and so I wanted to add that. But that's honestly how I feel. I like my faith is under fire, at least at times. And, Michael, probably not the only one that feels that way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think you're the only one that feels that way. I think a lot of people feel that way. I think we've paved the way for many things in our culture. And what I mean by the cultures are our sitcoms, our entertainment establishments, et cetera. I think it's become acceptable to mock Christianity, which is the majority religion in our country. I think it's become acceptable to mock traditional manliness and masculinity. I think it's also become the butt of every joke and every sitcom to make fun of the dad on the show. When I was a kid and a little old school, watching shows like Little House on the Prairie, but Charlie Ingalls, this guy was a G, as we say on the street, right? He was the man in his household, and everybody looked up to him in town and everywhere else. But Ricky Ricardo, there was a back and forth with him and his wife, but he was still the husband. He was the man. It was a great show. But and these are the shows that I did watch growing up. Ralph Cramden on The Honeymooners. So my parents watched. We were poor. They had the rights to the TV, so I had to watch what they were watching. But that's what it was. And now today, it seems like every dad in every sitcom is some sort of blundering idiot who can, he's only good for some slapstick comedy where he just, drives a nail right into his own thumb. And I feel like dads have been ridiculed. You have a court system that has eliminated dads' rights at a level that's way superior than what you've ever seen happen to women. And you couple all of that with the changes that we have in the body politic and our culture and our music, our entertainment, and voila, you have a recipe for people that not only hate Christians, but they hate Christian men. And that's the latest thing, right? Nobody wants to hear from another white Christian man or an old white Christian man. And it's like it's okay to be an ageist and a racist and a misogynist or a misandrist as long as you're doing it against old white men. That's the biggest threat in America. And again, I'm not here necessarily to support and defend old white men, but I would think if somebody said that about me, the biggest threat in America is, young, mid-career Hispanic guys, I'd say, hey, my call letters are F you, right? I mean, what else could you say to somebody like that? You can't reason with people like that. So I think you're raising a good point. The Christian faith has definitely been under attack, as has the traditional family, the traditional marriage, and so much. And it's kind of part of why we do what we do. And I appreciate your call, Michael. We're getting to the rest of your calls. We got calls from all over. We're talking about Delaware, Albany, New York, Jefferson City, Missouri, Evergreen, Montana. We're zigzagging across the country, and we're coming right back. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. Valdez with an S.
All right, we're going straight to the middle of America. Let's go to Bill in Jefferson City, Missouri, KTTR. Bill, our resident historian. Go right ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. Wanted to let you know, since we were talking about death penalties tonight,
yes.
Burt Lancaster film that he really oversold, and The Birdman of Alcatraz. But before he did that, he was at Fort Leavenworth, and he had a great PR team. Well, that's where he did the birds first. And he had a PR team that appealed to three presidents. Woodrow Wilson's wife, remember, Woodrow Wilson was invalidized, and so she agreed that he shouldn't be put to death. So he got out of the death penalty at Leavenworth. Then he also later appealed to Harry Truman, and he also appealed to President Kennedy. But unfortunately, he died before the night before Kennedy's assassination. So it never made the news, but it was a great story.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it. And let me tell you, Bill, this is coming on the heels of a call we just had from Washington, where they were saying they're no longer prosecuting crimes for graffiti. And this is stemming from a lawsuit over chalk, over people using chalk to write on the floor things about Black Lives Matter and things that had to do with like anti-police slurs on police barricades. And I thought to myself, and I'm telling you this because I know you're our resident historian here on the program, and I was very into graffiti art in my teenage years and was going to do a mural once and had no idea that I needed to get prior express permission because the wall that we were using was destroyed with like chicken scratch vandalism, and we were going to put a really nice piece of art there, nice and colorful. And well, anyway, undercover cop came and let me know that wasn't allowed, me and my two buddies, and escorted us to the county police station. And as you were telling your story about Alcatraz, I was like, I've never been to prison. The closest I ever went was I sat in a cell in that county police station. But it just made me think of how they're not prosecuting crimes for graffiti in Washington. I could have used that as a teenager. Ultimately, nothing came of it. But it was just an interesting story, and interesting to see how the Birdman of Alcatraz appealed to all these different presidents, not the least of which was Woodrow Wilson, who is really one of my least favorite people in history. Not only was I think he was a bad president, but he was also a bad governor in New Jersey and president of Princeton. The guy was just miserable, but had success in politics. Go figure, Bill.
You got that right. I agree with you totally.
Yeah. Well, now you have a little tidbit from my own history. Thank you, Bill, for the call. I appreciate it. I bet you haven't heard another talk radio host that got in trouble for doing graffiti as a teenager. Let's go to Linda. Linda is in Albany, New York, WGDJ. Go right ahead, Linda.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for taking my call.
Yes.
The conversations about a whole month for the trans, as opposed for Christians, there's only been one day out of the whole year for prayer that was understood that everybody was saying just on that one Sunday once a year. So how about we start having a whole month of prayers for Christians? Each Sunday, the 4 out of that month would be understood that everybody over the whole world was praying again a specific prayer, and people could pray that prayer either at night just before they go to bed or when they get up in the morning. And I'm betting maybe there might be quite some good changes on this planet if we did that.
You know, I think you're right. And it's interesting. You're right. Pride Month is a month-long celebration of lesbian, gay, transgender, queer pride. But yet the National Day of Prayer is that one day. Usually they celebrate on my birthday, May 5th. And it's a great point that you make. You know, why don't we have a National Prayer Month if others can have? And it's probably because we didn't choose to, right? We should take a page out of their playbook and become competitive that way. And, you know, I support that. I really do. I think it's how bad could the world be if we dedicated a month instead of a day to prayer? It's a no-brainer to me, Linda. Thanks for the call. Big shout out to everybody in upstate New York. Let us continue with our buddy Doc in Wilmington, Delaware, as soon as we come back.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back. I said we were going to go to Doc in Wilmington, Delaware. Let's quickly do that. Doc, go right ahead.
Rich, you've been hitting out of the park every time. Westwood One made a wise choice of choosing. I think the world of you. Rich, We have to take this country back. We Republicans have to take this country back. And I want to thank you and your show for letting all of us call in nationwide and for letting various guests of all views on your show and experts on your show. You are part of my ongoing continuing education. I've been following you since you were on PhD here, the big talker in the Philadelphia region. And Rich,
Yes,
you're
sir.
just fantastic. All I've got to say is Godspeed and keep up the good work.
Oh, well, that's nice of you, Doc. And I don't know if you missed yesterday's announcement, but I will toot my horn again. I was added to the Heavy 100 list, which is the top 100 radio hosts in America from Talkers Magazine. It was quite an honor, and I'm grateful for it. And I thank you, Doc, for the call and for your kind words. And you're right. We have to, with respect to what you had mentioned to me last time about the border, we have to tighten it up. And we have to take the country back. And the only way to do it is to protect our borders and do what we knew was right once. Thank you for the call. I appreciate it. Let's go to John in Montauk, New York, listening online. Rich Valdez, AmericaAtNight.com. John, go right ahead.
Hey, Rich. Really appreciate you taking my call. And really love your show, man. Been listening. This is been pretty interesting. You know, it's one of my first times, and you're a very interesting guy, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I got a question. What is your opinion on the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, I don't understand the question. What kind of answer are you looking for? Like something like, oh, it's fantastic that they're exercising their free speech, or I think that the founders of the BLM movement are admitted Marxists and they have a Marxist agenda. I'm not sure the angle. What are you looking for here?
I just kind of want to know what you have maybe more recently on the recent Black Lives Matter movement that kind of happened in 2020. Just kind of what's been happening over the past 3 years.
Well, I mean, with respect to that, I've done, there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of me talking about this from 2020. But I think, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, they've admitted to being trained Marxists. And this is a Marxist movement. And up until they got called out for it rather publicly, part of their agenda was to modify or eliminate the nuclear family. Again, these are things that I could never get behind. I could never support, right? Now, with respect to supporting African Americans, and I grew up in Brooklyn with black people. I have lots of black friends. My heritage is Puerto Rican, which are, blacks and indigenous island folk and Spaniards mixed. So, that's my heritage. It's who I am. So with respect to, I think, of course, Black Lives Matter. Every life matters. I think blue lives matter. I got brothers that are cops. So this is one of those things where it really depends on what you're looking for. But ultimately, cops shouldn't abuse people and people shouldn't abuse cops. Hope that helps. Thanks for the call, and I hope you call back again soon, John. Frank in Evergreen, Montana, I owe you one. We'll get to you tomorrow. Hasta la próxima. Take care. Good night. And God bless. I am Rich Valdez. We're going to do it again tomorrow. Don't move a muscle.